The bass thundered through the exclusive Ibiza nightclub as Ethan Montgomery stood at his VIP table, surrounded by bottles of premium champagne worth more than most people's monthly salary. Celebrity faces flickered in the strobe lights, a famous actor to his left, a supermodel to his right, but their presence felt as hollow as the empty bottles littering his table. He lifted his crystal glass, watching the bubbles rise to the surface. The same emptiness that had plagued him for years crept in, despite the pulsing music and beautiful people vying for his attention. A gorgeous brunette placed her hand on his shoulder, whispering something in his ear, but her words were lost in the flood of memories that suddenly overwhelmed him. The church bells rang clear in his mind, cutting through the present moment. He was back there, standing at the altar, his collar suddenly too tight, his palms sweating. Lisa stood before him in her white dress, her eyes full of love and trust. The priest's words echoed, "Do you, Ethan Montgomery, take Lisa Williams to be your lawfully wedded wife?" The silence that followed haunted him still. He remembered the way his mouth went dry, how his heart hammered against his ribs. The congregation waited, the air growing thicker with each passing second. Lisa's expression shifted from joy to confusion, then to dawning horror as he took a step backward. I can't," he had stammered, his voice carrying in the perfect acoustics of the church. The collective gasp from the guests sounded like a gust of wind. But it was Lisa's face that branded itself into his memory, the way her features crumpled, how her bouquet slipped from her fingers and hit the floor with a soft thud. Back in the present, Ethan downed his champagne in one gulp. A waiter appeared immediately with another bottle, but Ethan waved him away. He moved through the crowd, bodies pressing against him as he made his way to the outdoor terrace. The Mediterranean air hit his face, but even here, he couldn't escape. Each party blurred into the next, Dubai, Monaco, St. Tropez. Different cities, different faces, same emptiness. He had thrown himself into this life of excess with determination, as if each party could erase 1 second of that day at the church. His wealth opened every door, bought every pleasure, but none of it touched the void that grew larger with each passing year. Tonight's party was supposed to celebrate another successful business deal, but Ethan couldn't remember the details anymore. He pulled out his phone, scrolling through messages from his assistant about meetings, from friends about upcoming events, from women whose names he barely remembered. Each message represented another attempt to fill the hollowness inside him. The music from the club throbbed behind him as he leaned against the railing, looking out over the twinkling lights of Ibiza town. A group of revelers burst onto the terrace, their laughter carrying across the space. They were celebrating something, a birthday, an engagement, a business success, their joy genuine and untainted. Ethan watched them with a detached curiosity, like an anthropologist observing a foreign culture. When was the last time he had felt joy that real? The morning chaos in Lisa's modest 3-bedroom home contrasted sharply with her former life of luxury. She moved efficiently through the kitchen, packing lunches while her 7-year-old twins, Marcus and Maya, argued over the last bowl of their favorite cereal. Their dark curls, still messy from sleep, caught the morning sunlight streaming through the window. "Mom," Maya took the last of the Cheerios. Marcus protested, his small hands gripping the empty box. "And you ate all the banana slices yesterday," Maya countered, protecting her bowl. Lisa placed 2 identical lunch boxes on the counter. "Marcus, there's oatmeal ready for you." "Maya, share half your cereal with your brother." Her voice carried the practiced patience of a single mother who had learned to navigate these daily skirmishes. As she watched her children eat, her eyes drifted to the family photos on the refrigerator. The twins' father, James, smiled back at her from their 5th birthday party, the last one before the cancer took him. The loss still felt fresh, even 2 years later. She'd met James 6 months after the wedding that wasn't, finding in him a love that was real, steady, and tragically brief. The doorbell interrupted her thoughts. It was Sharon from next door, dropping off some paperwork for tonight's community meeting. "The school board is sending their lawyer," Sharon warned, her face tight with concern. "They're trying to dismiss our discrimination complaints." Lisa nodded, adding the documents to her briefcase. What had started as informal meetings among local mothers had grown into an organized movement. They were fighting against the subtle and not-so-subtle discrimination their children faced in the prestigious local school district, from being consistently overlooked for advanced programs to facing harsher disciplinary actions for minor infractions. That evening, Lisa stood before 30 parents in the community center's fluorescent-lit meeting room. The worn linoleum floor and metal folding chairs weren't impressive, but the determination in the room was palpable. Her legal training, once used for corporate contracts, now served a different purpose. They want us to believe these are isolated incidents, Lisa's voice carried clearly across the room. But when Marcus's test scores qualified him for the gifted program, and he was the only African-American child not recommended for enrollment, that wasn't isolated. When Maya's teacher repeatedly sent her to the principal's office for attitude problems while praising white students for being assertive, that wasn't isolated. Parents nodded, many having similar stories. Lisa continued, her passion evident but her delivery measured and precise. We're not just fighting for our children. We're fighting for every child who comes after them. The school board thinks we'll get tired and give up. They think we can't afford to fight. But they're wrong. She outlined their legal strategy, explaining how documentation and united action would force the board to address their concerns. The twins sat in the back row, coloring quietly, occasionally looking up at their mother with pride. They might not understand everything being discussed, but they understood that their mom was fighting for them. As the meeting concluded, several mothers approached Lisa with new incidents to document. She listened carefully, taking notes, building their case piece by piece. The weight of their trust pressed on her shoulders, but it was a weight she welcomed. This was where she belonged, not in a white dress waiting for a man who couldn't commit, but standing strong with her community, fighting for justice. The mahogany desk in Ethan's Manhattan office felt more like a life raft than a piece of furniture as he stared at the financial reports spread before him. Red numbers jumped off the page, his real estate ventures in Dubai were hemorrhaging money, and his tech investments weren't performing as projected. The wild parties and impulsive business decisions of the past few years were finally catching up with him. Your liquid assets are down 40% from last quarter, Mike Henderson, his financial advisor and oldest friend, said from the leather chair across the desk. Unlike the yes-men who usually surrounded Ethan, Mike had stuck around since their college days, maintaining his brutal honesty. The lifestyle you're maintaining isn't sustainable, even for you. Ethan loosened his tie, feeling the pressure building behind his temples. We'll recover. The market's just going through a correction. This isn't about the market, Mike leaned forward, his expression serious. You're self-destructing, and you're taking your father's legacy down with you. When was the last time you attended a board meeting sober? The question hung in the air like smoke. Ethan swiveled his chair to face the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the Manhattan skyline he'd once felt on top of. Now each glittering building seemed to mock his downward spiral. I'm managing fine, Ethan muttered, but even he didn't believe it anymore. The weekend's events in Monaco were a blur, something about betting $500,000 on red at the casino, then buying drinks for the entire club. The details were lost in a champagne haze. Mike stood up, walking to the bar cart that had become a permanent fixture in the office. He picked up a half-empty bottle of premium scotch. Remember when this used to be for celebrating deals, not getting through Tuesday mornings? Ethan didn't respond. His hand instinctively went to his wallet, fingering the worn leather. He knew what was inside, hidden behind his credit cards and membership badges to exclusive clubs. He'd never thrown it away, though he'd tried several times. If you don't get help, Mike continued, I'll have to resign. I won't watch you destroy everything your father built. The threat should have angered him, but Ethan felt only numbness. He pulled out his wallet, and the photograph slipped out, worn at the edges, creased from years of being carried. Lisa smiled up at him, her face captured in a moment of pure joy during their engagement party. The photographer had caught her mid-laugh, her eyes bright with hope and love. You still carry that? Mike's voice softened, seeing the photo. Ethan traced the edge of the picture with his thumb. The Lisa in the photo didn't know what was coming, didn't know that the men she trusted would leave her standing alone in a church full of people. She didn't know her faith in him was misplaced. I can't even remember why I left anymore, Ethan admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. It all seemed so clear that day, all my doubts, my fears. Now it just seems cowardly. Mike supplied. Ethan didn't deny it. The empire he'd built since that day, the parties, the deals, the endless distractions, suddenly felt like an elaborate shield, protecting him from facing his own weakness. The courthouse's marble halls echoed with footsteps as Lisa strode toward courtroom 3B, her heels clicking against the polished floor. Her charcoal gray suit projected the professional confidence she'd cultivated over years of legal battles. Today's case was crucial, representing Maria Santos, a single mother fighting to maintain custody of her children against a system that seemed determined to work against her. Inside the courtroom, Judge Harrison peered over his reading glasses, his reputation for favoring traditional family structures making him a challenging adversary. Across the aisle sat Theodore Walsh, a corporate lawyer whose fees could fund a small nonprofit for a year. His client, Maria's ex-husband, sat smugly beside him, his new wife perfectly coiffed and positioned for maximum effect. "Your Honor," Lisa began, her voice steady and clear, "Ms. Santos has maintained primary custody of her children for the past 3 years while working 2 jobs and pursuing her degree. The suggestion that her children would be better served in their father's custody simply because he has remarried and can provide a more affluent lifestyle is both discriminatory and contrary to the children's best interests." In the gallery, a different drama was unfolding. Ethan Montgomery had slipped in through the back door for his own minor legal matter, scheduled for later that morning. His breath caught when he recognized Lisa's voice. 7 years had changed her, gone was the soft-spoken woman who dreamed of a simple life together. In her place stood a force of nature, commanding the courtroom with practiced ease. "Ms. Williams," Walsh interrupted, "isn't it true that your client frequently relies on community childcare programs? That she can't afford the private education Mr. Santos is offering?" "Objection, Your Honor," Lisa countered. "Counsel is attempting to equate wealth with parental fitness. The community programs in question are licensed, regulated, and staffed by qualified professionals. They provide cultural education and peer support that has demonstrably benefited these children." From his position in the back row, Ethan watched as Lisa systematically dismantled Walsh's arguments. She presented evidence of Maria's children's academic improvements, their strong community ties, and their emotional well-being under their mother's care. But it was more than her legal arguments that held him transfixed, it was the passion behind them, the unwavering conviction in her voice. "These children need stability, Your Honor," Lisa concluded, "but they also need a parent who understands their experiences, who can guide them through the challenges they'll face in a world that won't always be fair to them. Ms. Santos isn't just providing for her children's physical needs, she's preparing them for reality while showing them they can overcome any obstacle with determination and dignity." Judge Harrison's usual stern expression had softened slightly. Walsh shifted uncomfortably in his expensive suit, his prepared arguments about financial superiority suddenly seeming hollow. The scene stirred something in Ethan, memories of the passion Lisa had once shown for their shared future, now redirected toward fighting for others. He found himself leaning forward, drawn into the stories of struggle and resilience being unveiled before him. The world of privilege he'd hidden in seemed increasingly superficial compared to the real battles being fought in this courtroom. After witnessing Lisa's courtroom performance, Ethan found himself parked outside the community center the following week. The building was modest, red brick with fading paint, but a steady stream of people moved in and out with purpose. Through discreet inquiries, he'd learned this was where Lisa's advocacy group met. He'd traded his designer suit for plain chinos and a button-down shirt, his luxury watch left at home. A baseball cap pulled low completed his transformation from millionaire playboy to anonymous volunteer. His hands gripped the steering wheel as he wrestled with his decision. One wrong move could destroy whatever good Lisa was building here. Inside, the community center hummed with activity. Lisa stood at the center of it all, directing volunteers, consulting with parents, and somehow still managing to help Maya with her homework. Marcus sat nearby, carefully organizing paperwork with the serious concentration of a child trying to emulate their parent. "Are you here to volunteer?" A woman approached Ethan, clipboard in hand. "I'm Sharon, volunteer coordinator." "Yes," he answered, giving the name he'd prepared. "John Baker. I heard you need help with the after-school program." The next few hours opened Ethan's eyes to a world he'd never truly seen before. He helped middle school students with math homework, noting how many worked with worn textbooks and borrowed calculators. He witnessed Lisa mediating between frustrated parents and overwhelmed teachers, always finding common ground where others saw only conflict. What struck him most was the sense of community. Unlike his world of transactional relationships, here people supported each other without expecting anything in return. A mother who couldn't afford childcare would find other parents willing to help. Students who excelled in certain subjects naturally helped those who struggled. Lisa moved through it all with grace and determination. She knew everyone's names, their struggles, their victories. When a teenage boy announced he'd received a B+ on his history test, her celebration was genuine. When a single mother broke down crying over a denied loan application, Lisa's comfort was immediate and practical, already forming a plan to help. "You're good with the kids," Lisa commented to John later, catching him teaching a group of students a math shortcut he'd learned years ago. She didn't recognize him. 7 years and careful preparation ensured that. "We could use someone with your patience in the tutoring program." Ethan felt his heart race at her proximity. Up close, he could see the faint lines around her eyes, earned from years of worry and determination. Her wedding ring was gone, but she wore a simple gold chain he recognized, a gift from her grandmother, who'd passed away shortly before their wedding. "The kids are amazing," he replied, keeping his voice carefully modulated. "They just need someone to believe in them." Lisa's face softened. "That's exactly what I've been trying to tell the school board." She handed him a stack of permission slips. "Would you be interested in helping with our upcoming field trip? We're taking the middle school students to visit a college campus." As he accepted the papers, their fingers brushed briefly. Lisa showed no sign of recognition, but Ethan felt the contact like an electric shock. He was playing a dangerous game, getting closer to the woman he'd hurt so deeply. Yet watching her interact with these children, seeing the difference she made in their lives, he felt increasingly drawn into her world. Over the next few weeks, John became a fixture at the community center. Ethan found himself staying later each day, drawn into the daily challenges and small victories of the community. One evening, as they cleaned up after a particularly successful tutoring session, he and Lisa fell into conversation. "The system's rigged against them from the start," Lisa explained, straightening chairs with practiced efficiency. "Take Marcus's situation last week. He scored in the 95th percentile on his math assessment, but his teacher suggested staying in regular classes might be better for his social development." Her voice carried the weight of countless similar battles. Ethan, careful to maintain his persona, asked, what was their justification? "The same coded language we always hear." They worried he might not feel comfortable in advanced placement. Translation: they don't expect black children to excel, so when they do, it challenges their prejudices. Lisa paused, leaning against a table. "But we're documenting everything now. Building a case they can't ignore." As they talked, Ethan began suggesting resources he knew about: grants, education foundations, corporate responsibility programs. He walked a careful line, offering information that someone with basic business knowledge might have, while concealing his intimate understanding of these financial structures. "You seem to know a lot about corporate funding," Lisa observed, her legal instincts picking up something she couldn't quite place. "I used to work in finance," he replied, the partial truth feeling bitter on his tongue. "Before I realized there were more important things than money." Lisa studied him for a moment, and Ethan felt his heart rate spike. But she simply nodded, sharing her own story of leaving corporate law. "After James died," she said quietly, "I realized life's too short to chase billable hours when there's real work to be done." The mention of James caught Ethan off guard. He'd learned of Lisa's marriage and widowhood through careful research, but hearing her speak of her late husband made his deception feel even heavier. Together, they developed strategies for approaching local businesses for support. Ethan suggested ways to frame their requests that would appeal to corporate interests, while Lisa refined the presentations to emphasize community impact. Their collaboration felt natural, productive, everything their past relationship could have been if he hadn't let fear drive his decisions. "You know what's strange?" Lisa said one evening, as they reviewed budget proposals. "I feel like I can talk to you about things I usually keep to myself. Maybe because you're new here, no preconceptions." The irony of her words hit Ethan like a physical blow. Here he was, carrying the heaviest preconception of all, their shared history that she didn't recognize. Yet he couldn't deny that their conversations felt genuine, perhaps more genuine than they'd ever been when he was simply Ethan Montgomery, the millionaire trying to be worthy of her. "Sometimes," he responded carefully, "people can surprise you." He meant it as both confession and apology, though she couldn't know that. The courtroom crackled with tension during the final hearing of Maria Santos's custody case. Lisa stood at the podium, her composure intact despite Walsh's increasingly aggressive questioning. Ethan sat in his now regular spot at the back, his presence both supportive and secretive. "Ms. Williams," Walsh's voice dripped with condescension, "your passionate advocacy is admirable, but isn't it true that your personal history might be coloring your judgment in this case? Your own experience as a single mother?" "Objection, Your Honor. Lisa's voice cut through the air. Counsel is attempting to make this about me rather than my client's fitness as a parent. Sustained, Judge Harrison intoned. Mr. Walsh, stick to the facts of this case. But Walsh wasn't finished. He turned to face the gallery, his expensive suit reflecting the fluorescent lights. The facts, Your Honor, show that Ms. Williams has assembled a collection of anecdotes and community testimonials, while my client offers stability, financial security, and a traditional family environment. Lisa remained steady, but Ethan could see the slight tension in her shoulders. He'd learned to read her signals over the past weeks, watching her fight battles both large and small. This was more than just another case, it was everything she stood for being put on trial. The opposition would have us believe that money equals good parenting, Lisa countered, her voice clear and controlled. That a mother's dedication, her children's emotional well-being, and their cultural identity are somehow worth less than a bigger house and private school tuition. From his position, Ethan could see the jury's reactions. Some nodded slightly at Lisa's words, while others seemed swayed by Walsh's polished arguments. The case was balanced on a knife's edge. Something snapped inside him. Before he could fully process his decision, Ethan stood up. Your Honor, I request permission to address the court. The room fell silent. Lisa turned, confusion crossing her face as she saw John rising from the gallery. Judge Harrison peered over his glasses. And you are? My name is Ethan Montgomery, he announced, his voice steady despite his racing heart. I've been volunteering at the community center where Ms. Santos and her children receive support. I have direct knowledge of their situation and the impact of these programs. Walsh recovered quickly. Your Honor, this is highly irregular. Mr. Montgomery has no standing in this case. I'm also prepared to testify about the transformative impact of Ms. Williams's advocacy program, Ethan continued, ignoring Walsh. I've witnessed firsthand how these support systems create stability and opportunity for children like Ms. Santos's. Lisa's expression shifted from confusion to shock as she recognized him. The mask of John had fallen away, revealing the men who'd left her at the altar 7 years ago, now standing in her courtroom, supporting her cause. Your Honor, Walsh interjected, Mr. Montgomery's reputation for excessive behavior is well documented in the press. His testimony would hardly. Which makes my perspective particularly relevant, Ethan cut in. I've seen both sides of this equation. I know what money alone can and cannot provide. The courtroom erupted into murmurs as Walsh strode forward, legal papers clutched in his hand. Your Honor, I have here numerous tabloid articles documenting Mr. Montgomery's lifestyle. Just last month, he was photographed gambling away millions in Monaco. Are we really going to take character testimony from? Enough. Judge Harrison's gavel cracked against the podium. Mr. Walsh, approach the bench. Ms. Williams, you as well. Lisa moved mechanically forward, her legal training taking over while her mind reeled. Every glance she'd shared with John, every conversation about the community's needs, every moment of growing trust, it had all been with Ethan. The same Ethan who destroyed her faith in love years ago. The gallery watched as the attorneys huddled with the judge, their voices low but intense. Ethan remained standing, his posture straight but his hands clenched at his sides. He could see the slight tremor in Lisa's shoulders, the way she gripped her legal pad too tightly. Ms. Williams, Judge Harrison's voice carried across the quiet courtroom, did you have prior knowledge of Mr. Montgomery's involvement in your community programs? No, Your Honor, Lisa's voice was professionally steady, though Ethan could hear the undertone of fury. Mr. Montgomery has been presenting himself as John Baker, a volunteer. This is the first I'm learning of his true identity. More murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Several community members who recognized John were now whispering and pointing at Ethan. Maya and Marcus, sitting with their grandmother in the gallery, looked confused at the adults' reactions to their math tutor. Walsh seized his opportunity. Your Honor, this deception speaks to a calculated attempt to manipulate the proceedings. Mr. Montgomery's presence and hidden agenda cast doubt on the credibility of Ms. Williams's entire advocacy program. That's not true, Ethan interjected, but Judge Harrison silenced him with a sharp look. Mr. Montgomery, the judge's voice was stern, while your desire to testify is noted, your methods are concerning. This court takes a dim view of deception, regardless of intent. Lisa stood ramrod straight, her legal mind racing beneath her composed exterior. Everything she'd built over the years, her reputation, her advocacy work, the trust of her community, was being called into question because of Ethan's presence. Again, he had managed to shake the foundations of her life, only this time while pretending to support her. Your Honor, she managed, Mr. Montgomery's actions, while inappropriate, have no bearing on the merits of Ms. Santos's case or the legitimacy of our community programs. His deception was personal in nature and unknown to all parties involved in this proceeding. The judge considered this for a moment, then declared, "We'll take a 30-minute recess. When we resume, I want to hear from Ms. Santos directly. Mr. Montgomery, you will remain available to the court. Ms. Williams, you may want to use this time to confer with your client about these developments." In the courthouse hallway, Lisa grabbed Ethan's arm and pulled him into an empty conference room, her composure finally cracking. "How dare you," she hissed, her voice trembling with rage. "Wasn't humiliating me once enough for you?" Ethan stood his ground, though the fury in her eyes made him want to step back. "Lisa, I know this looks bad." "Looks bad?" She laughed bitterly. "You infiltrated my community center, gained my trust under a false name, and then potentially compromised my biggest case. This doesn't just look bad, Ethan. This is bad." The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across their faces as they confronted each other. Through the door's window, curious onlookers passed by, trying to catch glimpses of their confrontation. "I never meant to hurt your case," Ethan said quietly. "I saw you in court that day, fighting for what's right, and something changed in me. I had to know more, to understand what you'd built. If I'd come as myself, I would have thrown you out," Lisa finished. "And I would have been right to do so. Instead, you played with my children's trust, with my community's faith in our program. Do you have any idea what Walsh will do with this? He'll paint everything I've built as a manipulation." Ethan reached for her arm, but she stepped back. "The work you're doing is real, Lisa. I've seen it firsthand. Let me testify to that. My word still carries weight in certain circles." "Your word?" Lisa's voice cracked. "Your word means nothing. You promised to marry me, remember? You promised to love me forever. Then you left me standing alone in a church full of people who pitied me. And now you think your word will help." The weight of 7 years of unspoken pain hung between them. Through the conference room windows, they could see the courthouse plaza where parents and children from their community center waited anxiously for news. "I was a coward then," Ethan admitted. "I ran because I was scared of not being enough for you, of failing you. And I've spent 7 years proving myself right through every bad decision I could make. But these past weeks, working in your program, seeing the difference you make." "Stop," Lisa held up her hand. "Just stop. This isn't about your redemption story, Ethan. This is about real people's lives. Maria could lose her children because of your little identity crisis." Judge Harrison's clerk appeared at the door, indicating the recess was nearly over. Lisa straightened her jacket, physically and mentally armoring herself for what was to come. "When we go back in there," she said, her voice cold and professional, "you will sit down and stay quiet. You've done enough damage. After this case is over, you will disappear from my community center and my life. Is that clear?" The next morning, tension filled the courtroom as Ethan approached the stand. Against Lisa's wishes, he'd filed a formal motion to testify. Judge Harrison, intrigued by the unusual circumstances, had granted it. Lisa sat rigid at the counsel table, her eyes fixed straight ahead. "Your Honor," Ethan began, his voice steady despite his nerves, "I'd like to present a proposal that goes beyond testimony." He pulled out a document and handed it to the bailiff. "This is a legally binding commitment to establish a $5 million community foundation." Murmurs rippled through the courtroom as the judge reviewed the document. Walsh jumped to his feet. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular. The foundation," Ethan continued, raising his voice slightly, "will be independently managed by a board of community members, with Ms. Williams serving as legal counsel if she chooses. Its primary purpose will be to establish a community school that emphasizes inclusive education and cultural awareness." Lisa's head snapped up, her expression a mix of disbelief and suspicion. The judge leaned forward, interested. "Mr. Montgomery, are you attempting to influence these proceedings with financial incentives?" "No, Your Honor. I'm demonstrating that the choice between economic opportunity and cultural connection is a false one." Ms. Santos and parents like her shouldn't have to choose between their children's heritage and their education. Ethan turned to face the gallery, where community members sat forward in their seats. I've spent weeks witnessing the strength of this community. I've seen children teaching each other, parents supporting one another, and Ms. Williams fighting tirelessly for justice. This foundation isn't charity, it's an investment in what already works. He pulled out another document. I'm also announcing my resignation as CEO of Montgomery Industries. I'll be transitioning to a role focused exclusively on corporate social responsibility and community investment. The courtroom burst into conversation. Lisa's carefully maintained composure cracked slightly as she processed his words. Walsh sputtered, his carefully constructed narrative about stability and resources crumbling. Furthermore, Ethan continued, his voice growing stronger, I've arranged for a coalition of corporate partners to establish a paid internship program for high school students from the community. Ms. Santos's children, and all the children in this community, deserve access to both opportunity and understanding. Judge Harrison studied Ethan carefully. And what do you expect in return for this investment? Nothing, Your Honor. The foundation will operate independently. I won't serve on the board or have any control over its decisions. This isn't about me, it's about supporting what Ms. Williams and this community have already built. In the gallery, Maya tugged at her grandmother's sleeve, whispering, Is that really Mr. John? Marcus stared intently at his former math tutor, processing this transformation. Lisa stood slowly. Your Honor, while we appreciate Mr. Montgomery's gesture, this case remains about Ms. Santos's fundamental right to raise her children in a nurturing, culturally aware environment. Exactly, Ethan agreed, meeting her eyes for the first time. I'm not here to save anyone. I'm here to acknowledge that sometimes the people we dismiss as needing help are actually the ones showing us the way forward. The judge's gavel cracked through the charged atmosphere. This court will recess to review Mr. Montgomery's proposal and its relevance to the matter at hand. Ms. Williams, Mr. Walsh, my chambers. Now. As the crowd began to disperse, Ethan caught Lisa's eye once more. In that moment, something shifted, not forgiveness, not yet, but perhaps the first crack in a wall 7 years in the making. Sometimes redemption starts not with grand gestures, but with the simple recognition of our own need to change.